Hi, thanks for tuning in again. In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the different designs that you can do with the wizard, with the templates. Up to now, we've just been looking at 101, the rectangle. Nothing terribly interesting or exotic there, but it's sort of your everyday expected sort of matting choice. But let's take a look at some of the different options that you have and how you might use those. If you want to do anything other than a rectangle, one way to do it in the new opening screen is to just simply click on the picture of the mat there with the 101, and this brings up the template library. And you'll see here that we have some different shapes, the oval, octagon, rounded corners, and so on. And there are a few here, the mixed, fillet, reserved area, and quad, that we'll circle back to and spend a little bit more time looking at that. And you'll see here that you have a lot of different options for different designs on the corners that you can use that add a bit of interest. There are a number with variations on rounded and arched tops. More variations on corners and rounded elements. And with the Nouveau and the Nouveau 2 here, we're starting to get into some variations on open V grooves. In menu 5, you get into some different specialty shapes, hearts, diamonds, and so on. And the number 506 star, that's a good versatile one. You might not think so, but we'll circle back to that and I'll show you some of the things that you can do with that. In menu number 6, you get into a lot of designs with the corners that have a very Southwest feel to them. You can see that by the names like the Arrowhead and the Navajo. And in menu 7, we start to get into some things with additional openings that could show something like a title on the bottom of a print, or it gives you a space where you could put something like a brass nameplate, something like that. That one's helpful for newspapers. And finally, we get into some different options for V-grooves, which you probably won't get a lot of use out of because there are other and probably better options for creating V-grooves. And then finally, menu number 9, more options for the nameplate sort of mat or additional openings where you could show, again, something like the name of the print and the artist, edition number, things like that. So let's go back up here and let's take a look at one of these designs. Let's just say the classic here. Okay, and once you do that, you'll see that the drawing reflects what you've chosen. And let's go ahead and hit OK and see what we have. Now, I'll get up on my soapbox for just a minute here. And a lot of framers have computerized mat cutters, but you'll hear them say that they never show or they never sell these designs because customers never ask for them. Well, customers aren't framers. They don't know the potential, they don't know the possibilities, and they're coming to us for our professional advice. So it's really up to us to give them the options when it's appropriate. And also, I think part of the reason that some framers never sell these is that they just don't show them very effectively or use them very effectively. In some frame shops I've seen, they've simply gone through and cut an 8x10 mat out of every one of these designs, and they keep them under the counter and they pull them out, or they'll put them in a simple frame in a row above the design counter, and it kind of looks like the menu at a fast food joint. A better approach would be to use some of these creative mat cuts on
pieces of artwork in the store, either pieces for sale or on your frame memory wall. Also, when you're doing projects like this, be sure to get pictures for your brag book.
So some of these designs, well, they're a little bit much, and they're really best used as a starting point. You rarely should just click on one of these and use it just as it is straight out of the can. All of these that have anything other than just a straightforward rectangular oval have a lot of different adjustments that you can make. And here's how you do that. Make sure that the opening is selected. I clicked inside the opening here, and we go up to the Properties tab over here in the upper left corner. And over here under the options, you'll see this parameters. If you click on that, it gives you all of the different things that can be adjusted. For instance, the size. Let's just go ahead and click on that and see how that changes. So you'll see that adjusting that size will make these little rounded bits larger and come in more on the image. The distance, that increases this little space right here and moves it further out or brings it further in, giving you more space between the opening and that little pie-shaped piece there. And on some of these, you have an A, B, C, and D, which will allow you to do different things to each corner. So for instance, if we change that 2 to a 1, let's see what happens. Okay, so when we go to 1, it removes that pie-shaped opening there, and when we go to 0, it removes it entirely. And then if we do that to another corner, now you have a design that has that little design just on the top 2 corners. And sometimes that can be enough. That might be exactly what you want. So it gives you a huge amount of flexibility between being able to remove certain elements, being able to have those elements just on certain corners, and adjust the size. So you have a huge amount of flexibility very easily. Now with some of these designs, there's a lot to adjust, and you may have no idea of what any of these change. If you go to this little question mark down here, it'll open up a window that gives you a diagram that shows you exactly what all of these different parameters, like the size here, refer to and what they'll change. And you'll see here that it has a diagram of the A, B, and C, D, the 4 corners, and what setting those values will do. And even then, sometimes it's not entirely clear what it does. So you're not committed to anything. So if you want to see, just start changing things and see what happens. You're not committed to anything yet. You're not cutting any mat, so don't worry about that. Okay, so let's take a look at some others. And if I wanted to change that, another way that you can switch from one opening style to another is just go up here to Style. And when you click on that, it brings up the menu again. Okay. Let's take a quick look at one of these, the staircase. And this has a very Southwest kind of feel to it. But as it is, it might be a bit much. This would look great on a nice piece of Southwest artwork from 1987. It could look rather dated today, though. So again, you can adjust things and get a more usable design that looks better that you could actually sell on a regular basis. So for instance, let's start by making this maybe just 1 step instead of 3. And let's adjust the width here. Let's make that fairly wide and maybe make the height a bit narrower. So it's just a very gentle little jog there. And in fact, let's take a look here and see which is which. So let's adjust A and D. And now we don't have any steps on the bottom two corners. And we took something that had a very Southwest sort of feel, maybe a little bit dated, and made something much more subtle. This kind of has a little bit more of an Asian feel to it, or you could see that as maybe sort of an arts and crafts sort of style that could look really nice on the right artwork. Okay, let's go back to properties again. Click on the opening and go back to our menu here. Okay, I promised that I would come back to the fillet, so let's take a look here. Okay, so this is a double mat, and you'll see here that instead of a matte layer, you've got a dotted line. Now, this represents the inner edge of the fillet. When you're laying out a mat for an inner fillet, laying out a mat for a fillet, you need to take into account the width of the fillet so that it doesn't impinge on the artwork too much. Or if you had a triple mat, oops, there we go. If you had a triple mat, you would want to adjust the width there so that you would have the proper reveal for the bottom mat. So what this template does, it sort of creates a sort of a phantom mat layer that will be taken up by the fillet. So the fillet is going to be layer number 2, and let's say that the fillet is 3/8 of an inch wide rather than 1/2 an inch. And we'll tab down, and let's say we want a bit more of the bottom mat to show. And there you go, and you see how everything is adjusted. And also, you may or may not have noticed, but the top mat is now being cut with a reverse bevel. So it saves you a lot of mental anguish and calculation. And by putting that reverse bevel on there automatically, it's one less thing that you have to think about and possibly forget about. Now, the width of the fillet, it will probably be listed on your work order, but it's a very good idea to take a piece of that fillet and actually measure it yourself, because in the manufacturing of molding, including fillets, there's always some small variations. So the fillet that you receive might be from a different run, that might be a small bit larger or smaller than your sample or what's listed on the specs. This template here, 314, the Camelback Flare, is a good example of how you can modify an existing template through the parameters to get a lot of different looks. And this one has a lot going on. You might look at it and think that there's not much that you can use it for. It has a little bit of a matronly look, I guess you could say. But let's take a look at how we can modify some of these things to create a design that we could use pretty easily. First, let's set the chamfer to 0. And sometimes you can get some pretty interesting things when you set some of these parameters to 0 or even a negative number. So let's just go ahead and make some of these 0. And by doing that, you see we get rid of that little detail at the corner, and we just get a nice little gentle swoop on the top and the bottom. And we could make that a little bit more pronounced by adjusting the arc height. And now we get something pretty nice, something that isn't too distracting, not too busy, but just has a nice little bit of interest. And again, if you're not completely sure about any of these things, just click the little question mark there and it'll bring up your diagram. Okay, so let's take a look at some other openings that could be useful. And I'm just going to put in any random dimensions here. Doesn't really matter. And let's go to this one, 506, the star. And you might look at that and think it's not very useful for making much more than just a star. But if we go to the properties and the parameters, we can see that there are quite a few things we can use this for. First off, you can adjust the number of points. So you can have a 6-sided star, 5-sided star, on and on and on. Let's just make that 5 again. The spikiness, I'll change that and you can see what it does. It will make the points of the star more or less sharp. But what happens when we make that 0? We get a pentagon. So if you have a need for any shape other than squares or circles or whatever, like a pentagon or a hexagon or octagon and so on, this would be the one to use. Just set the spikiness at 0 and set the points to the number of sides that you want. And there you go. That's how you can get an octagon or a septagon or a nonagon. Now let's take a look at another template that you might find useful now and then. And again, we're just putting in some numbers just to get some numbers in there. And I'm going to select quad, number 111. And let's hit OK. And as you may have guessed, if you're thinking ahead just a little bit, this template will allow you to put different designs on each of the 4 corners. When we go to the properties, under options, you'll see here that we have quad. And it gives you the 4 quadrants of the mat. And when you click on that, it will bring up the template library and allow you to select a corner from any one of these designs. So for instance, let's see about the octagon. And then on quadrant 4, maybe a rounded corner. Quadrant 2, maybe the octangle. And then for the third, let's do the angled array. And yes, you are getting some very odd looking mats here, but this is just for demonstration purposes only. I don't recommend this in the real world. And if we go back to parameters, it allows you to go from quad to quad, corner to corner, and adjust the parameters for each one of those depending on the different options that are available for that design. So that allows you to do some really interesting things. And realistically speaking, in the real world, what you would probably be using this for is to apply a design to maybe just the top 2 corners or the bottom 2 corners. And that's probably where it's going to be most useful for you. All right, let's take a look at some more. This one here, number 705, the newspaper. As the name might imply, it's pretty useful when you're framing a newspaper. Sometimes the customer will bring in the front page from the Super Bowl or the World Series or some big event that they want to commemorate, and they'll ask you to frame it to show the headline and maybe just the relevant article and cover up the rest of it with the matting. So this is the one that would be very helpful for that. If we go to properties and go to parameters, you'll see here that there are a number of different adjustments here. The height on the right to accommodate the headline, the width, And if you bring that out or in, that will let you cover up more or less of the headline and the extra articles. And then you can do the same thing on the left-hand side as well. So you can just play around with that and adjust it to where you need to get the headline and the relevant things and covering up the rest. And for this, you will be measuring things pretty carefully, but there's sometimes a level of precision that's sort of difficult to get just by measuring. So it would be a very good idea to have some just inexpensive throwaway mat board that you can use to make a few test cuts here and there to test this out before you commit to the real thing. Okay, so let's just take a look at one or two more things here. Okay, here we go. 703 and 704. Both of these have a main opening with a smaller secondary opening here, sort of framed off by a little bit of mat that goes around it. And this can be very nice when you're framing, let's say, a football jersey. You can put the jersey here and then have a space for a photo, or maybe a baby's christening dress and put a small photo of the baby wearing the dress there. Um, or it could be a piece of two-dimensional artwork, say a magazine article, and then a smaller photo of the person who's featured there or something that goes along with it. And if we go to the properties, under the parameters, that allows you to adjust the size of this smaller secondary opening here to fit the photograph or what have you. And you can adjust the distance between here, this bit, and you can adjust the offset, how far you want it away. Most of the time you would probably want it to kind of line up with the main opening there, but there's no rule that says it has to be like that. You can always adjust it so that it kind of comes out a little bit that way. And it is possible, you're probably asking, is it possible to put another opening just like that over here on the left as well? It is. It's a little bit beyond the scope of the basic things that we're doing here right now, but yes, it is possible. And I'll just leave it at that for now. So there we are. That's not a comprehensive review of every opening possible, but a lot of these are pretty similar. And I've tried to highlight some that would be most useful and versatile for you. And any of the things that I've shown you as far as the parameters and things like that would apply to any of these that you're using. So I would encourage you to get in here, take a look, and see what these different templates do and what happens when you make different adjustments to them. So that's all I have for you right now, and we'll be back with more.